Okay, you guys, so this is the start of balance part 2. So if you haven't done part 1, I would go back and watch part 1 and do part 1 and print it out and hand it in. It looks a little something like this or like this, where it's images of balance that you found on the internet. Part 2 is a little bit different in that you're going to be creating it. So here is a finished example of what balance part 2 will look like. You are making examples of balance using shapes, lines, and colors. The first many steps of this document will simply take you through the setup of creating the 4 squares that you see and the circle that you see in the upper left-hand corner with the pie slices. Before you even get to the design, there's a lot of setup. So here it comes. Okay, so first thing that I did was I opened the instructions in the Google Classroom. Everything you need is on this piece of paper, just in case you miss it here in the video or you missed it while I was discussing it in class. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on my rulers. In order to turn on rulers, and you're going to watch right about here, because the rulers are going to pop up, I'm going to hit Control R on my keyboard. So there's my rulers. You'll also notice that I have a horizontal landscape-oriented document. It is not vertical or portrait like this one. It's the opposite. So next, the instructions say to pull a guide from the left side ruler to 5.5 inches. So with my selection tool chosen, I'm going to click on the ruler and drag a line out. I'm not releasing the mouse. You can sort of see that line a little bit right there. And I'm going to line it up with 5.5 at the top. Boom. And there's that blue line. That blue line will not print at the end, so you don't have to delete these guides. The next instruction says to pull a guide from the top ruler to 4.25. So again, I'm going to click on the ruler at the top and drag a line down and land at 4.25 or 4.25. There we go. We've successfully divided the paper into 4 quarters. I've moved some of these instructions around, so I'm going to pull out 2 more guidelines. That might seem a little bit different, but you'll see why in a moment. So the next one says to pull out a guide to 8.25. So I'm going to pull this out from the left, and I'm going to drop it at 8.25, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Pull a guide from the left ruler to 2.75 or 2.75. If you're not sure where those measurements are on the lines at the top, please just ask me. I will point them out to you. So next up, the instructions say to create a square that is 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches in each quadrant. The squares should align side to side and top to bottom. So a square is like a rectangle, except the sides are even. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to left click once, and it's going to ask me how big I want that rectangle to be, or that square to be. And I want it to be 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And then I'm going to click OK. Before I go any further, I'm going to make sure that my square has a stroke, and it doesn't. So I'm going to make it black, and I'm going to make sure the thickness is 1 point. Perfect. So now I'm going to move it up into the left quadrant. This guideline should be bisecting the square. So the center of that square is right here. So I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to line it up. And now, instead of drawing 3 more squares, I'm just going to copy and paste them. So this is selected. Control C, Control V is copy paste. So do that 3 more times. So I have all 4 of my squares now, and I line them up in the center with this guideline bisecting the center of the line. But now I want to make sure that these squares are the same distance apart here as they are over here. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn on my grid. So all you have to do is go to View and then click on Show Grid. So this will allow me to zoom in and literally count the number of squares in between each square. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Again, I'm using the arrow keys on my cursor once I have this selected. And now I'm going to zoom back out for a moment, and then I'm going to zoom in over on this side and do the same thing. You want to make sure that they're equidistant apart from top to bottom. And we know they're equidistant apart from left to right because of our guidelines bisecting the center of each square. Okay, so now everything is all lined up and even from left to right, even from top to bottom. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna lock everything we've done so far, these 4 squares and all the guidelines. So over on the right-hand side, you should be able to find your layers palette. It looks like this double diamond right here. So click that open, and then you're gonna open up layer 1 by clicking on this little arrow right here. Okay, so here we are. We are clicking open this layer to show everything we have so far. And so we have 4 rectangles and 4 guides. And all we're gonna do is click inside this little space in between the eyeball and the little blue line, except for layer 1. Do not lock layer 1, lock everything else that's underneath it. Now, the instructions say each square should have a white fill and a black stroke. It can be no fill or it can be a white fill, but definitely make sure it has a black stroke. Okay, so up next, the directions say to create the radial pie. We're gonna be using the circle shape tool to create a 3 by 3 inch circle. So your circle shape tool is hiding underneath your rectangle tool. So we look at our rectangle tool, you want the one that says ellipse. And then all you're gonna do is the same thing you did to create your circles. Left click once, this menu pops up. You want it to be 3 inches by 3 inches. I know it's a circle, doesn't make sense that they're asking for width and height, but let's see what we get. Boom, you got a circle. You only need 1, and it needs to be centered inside the upper left-hand square. And I'm using my arrow keys on my keyboard to line up that anchor point at the top with the guideline. So it's perfectly centered, and then I'm going to use the grid to make sure it's perfectly centered inside of that square. So there's 2 sets of squares at the bottom, 2 sets of squares above it at the top. Okay, so there's our circle, and I zoomed in so I could see it really clearly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my line tool, and the line tool is right here. And I'm going to draw a line from the very top of this circle all the way straight down to the bottom. In order to have a line that is nice and straight, after you click to start drawing the line, hold down the shift key to make sure it's nice and straight. Otherwise, it could go off and get all sorts of wonky. So I drew 2 lines, a vertical line and a horizontal line that bisect the middle of that circle. And I'm using the guidelines to help me make sure that this is in the center. So up next, I want to select both of these lines, copy, paste, and rotate them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lock the circle so that I don't select it by accident. And using my selection tool, I'm just going to draw a square. I don't know if you guys can see that. And that selects both lines. It's not selecting anything else because everything else is locked. So now I'm going to Control C, Control V, and it made a second set of like this letter T, but you couldn't see it at first because it layers it right over the top. When you copy and paste something, it usually places it right on top of the original. So I have 2 sets of lines now. I have this horizontal and this vertical, and I want to rotate the second set. So I'm going to take my cursor all the way down to the corner where this anchor point is. And if you hold your cursor right out to the edge, it turns into a double arrow, like a letter U with arrows on the end of it. And I'm going to click and rotate. And then I'm going to grab it and place it in the center. And I want to make sure that I'm nice and even Stevens, and I need to, I think, make a little adjustment. See how this doesn't touch here, this is overlapping here, so I'm going to adjust those lines now. Okay, so once you have all of the lines adjusted, you want to make sure that you lock all your layers. Notice that I don't have layer 1 locked, but I have everything locked underneath it. All the guides, all the rectangles, the ellipse, and the lines inside of it. So everything is locked and in place. And this is the basic setup of your entire document. So here's what comes up next. We're going to start in the upper left with our radial design. So instead of creating a design in each one of the 8 spaces, we're going to work smarter and not harder again and only focus on creating a design in one of these pizza pie slices. I'll show you what I mean. But I created my design in just one pizza pie slice. So now what I'm going to do is grab my selection tool and select everything inside my design. And I can do this the easy way as long as everything else is locked. The circles, the lines in the circles, the squares, as long as those things are locked, when I draw this square with my selection tool, it should only choose what's inside the pie slice that isn't locked. You're going to right click, group. Now it's all one unit. Even if you just click on one line, it selects everything in the group. And then Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And now I have a second design. And again, we're going to use that rotation button. Click, rotate, line it up, rotate it a little bit more to get it to fit there perfectly. And then do the same thing. You're going to repeat that whole process 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more times.